So earlier this morning, we had a fantastic turnout for the EU post-market surveillance requirements. And this afternoon, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to cover the US post-market surveillance requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you use post-market surveillance for FDA submissions. And this might be foreign to some people. They're like, well, there aren't any post-market surveillance requirements for the US. But we'll get to that in a minute. I don't want to spoil all the slides. But this particular presentation is going to explain what are the requirements for the US and what the quality system requirements are and how that will be used in some of the databases that you use for that. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask, but avoid any of the proprietary questions, because if you're giving confidential information, I'm recording this, and then I'll have to go back and edit. But you're welcome to set up a meeting with me, and I can discuss things offline with you to answer any of your questions that would be confidential in nature, and I'm more than happy to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So, first slide here for today. What are the requirements for post-market surveillance? You'll find them in ISO 1345, 2016. It's clause 8.2.1 for customer feedback or feedback. But there is not a corresponding requirement in the QSR. So when you look at the QSR, there's no customer feedback clause or section. There's no post-market surveillance requirements in the FDA QSR. If you look at 21 CFR 82198 for complaint handling, that's a different clause in ISO 1345. In the MDR reporting, that's also a different clause in the ISO standard. So there just isn't an exact match for this requirement in the QSR. Now, we'll get to what could potentially happen later when the FDA changes their policy to modernize the quality system requirements from the current 820 to replacing it with ISO 1345 by reference. But as it stands today, there is no customer feedback or post-market surveillance requirement in the QSR. Now, are there FDA post-market surveillance requirements? There's what I thought was the answer, and then when I investigated this for this presentation and another one that I did for a podcaster, I realized that everything that I thought was wrong. What I thought was there are absolutely no post-market surveillance requirements by the FDA for class 1 and class 2. And I thought that all class 3 devices required post-market surveillance all the time. And those were both wrong. So I'll get into what actually is required. There are two types of FDA post-market surveillance requirements. The first type is a 522 post-market surveillance studies database. The second type is a post-approval study or PASS study, and that has a different database. And I put the hyperlinks for both of those databases, but I'm going to show you right now where you can find those. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to do a new share of my Google browser here. And the way I do this is I have a little hyperlink for this that I always go to, but for people that want to find it, people that want to find it on their own, I'll show you how to find it. You go into fda.gov, and then you can go up to the menu and you look for medical devices. So they have all these different types of products. You want medical devices. And then you scroll down, and down here it says all medical device databases. You click on that, and this is where you find all the medical device databases. And that's my hyperlink that I go to all the time, many times a day. Here's where the 522 post-market surveillance studies are. And a little bit further down, you're going to find the PASS studies right here, post-approval studies PASS database. Those are the two databases. Since I'm here, I'll show you this one first. So you saw it took a little bit of time to load up, but they have 245 active orders here. You can look at all orders. So that's 613. You can look at inactive orders. It's taking a little bit. Inactive orders is 440. And then the active orders that I have right now is 245. And it takes a little bit of a while to go through each of these databases. And when you click on records, you can look at each individual order, but this one is for a post-market a PMA device, specifically the Centromag circulatory support system. And it tells you over here on the right what the status of each of these studies is. The other type of database or post-market database is this 522 post-market surveillance database. And they have in here all the orders. This is one of the things you find with the FDA database. It's a little slow, 344 orders. And you can sort through this and it tells you what the status is. You can see many of these are terminated, probably because they've been completed. And then you have inactive orders. So it's a subset of the 344. It's 327. And for active orders of these 522, it's a very small number, only 20. And they show this, and you might recognize some of these. We'll talk about this later, the Freestyle Libre 2 flash glucose monitoring system. So that's a continuous glucose monitoring system that you put on your arm. It's a glucose sensor for diabetics to monitor their glucose levels and medicate properly or adjust their diet. So that's just one example. Here's ReWalk. That's a rehab device for people that are having trouble walking for neurological reasons. Maybe they had an injury and they're being recovered. This helps them walk and gives them some mobility. Different approach than using a wheelchair. But these devices, the FDA has said, we're concerned about something with this device, so we want you to do a 522 study. And it's not optional. They're saying you shall. Your other alternative would be to pull it off the market, but you have to do it. And it's usually related to a recall situation or adverse events that they're seeing, and they want you to look at a specific item. There could be something that the FDA has said, we want you to do a post-market study because it's a new product and we're worried about a certain risk. But usually the issue is there's an adverse event or a recall, and they want you to investigate it for that reason. So I'm going to go back to my slide share again. So these are the two links. They're in the presentation. I'm going to take this recording. I'm going to be posting it on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see those links there. But I also showed you how to get to each of those. And I think probably if you typed in these two into Google browser, it would take you to right exactly where you want to be. Now, so here's the metrics on the 522 post-market surveillance studies. And this is why I said I was dead wrong on whether there are any class 1 or class 2 devices that have post-market surveillance studies. There are actually 12 510K products and 7 de novo products. And the de novos, by definition, are class 1 or class 2. There are no class 3 de novos. And there are 12 of the 510K. These are all going to be class 1 or class 2. There are no longer any class 3 510K products. The FDA has systematically eliminated all of them and reclassified them all as all the class 3s as PMAs instead of 510Ks. I think the last one to have that happen to was the AEDs, the automatic electronic defibrillators. So there are only 20 orders, and there are some class 2 devices here. There are also some PMA devices here that they've had this mandatory 522 studies that are required. But it's a very small number, and it's on a case-by-case data basis as the need arises. Now, what would happen in Europe in this same scenario? They could ask a competent authority or a notified body could force a company to do these types of specific PMCF studies where they're trying to gather the same exact kind of data. This would be a PMCF study. And if the device continue to have this concern, the Europeans would say, this is not a state-of-the-art device. This is a device where the benefits do not outweigh the risk. We want you to remove this from the market or suspend the CE certificate or redesign it or something. If the device PMCF study looked good and the outcomes were very good for that device, then they would say, okay, you've addressed our concern and you can stop the study. But the FDA is using these studies to do monitoring of potentially high-risk devices or to address a specific concern. Somebody had a comment in the chat here. So will this morning's session be shared? It is already on our YouTube channel. So that was a great question. And so if you go on to Medical Device Academy's YouTube channel, you'll find it there. It's the latest posting. And there's some hyperlinks there as well in that video or in the description below. So please take a look. And that's where this one will go when we're done as well. Now, if we go to the next slide where we're talking about the post-approval studies or PAS studies, there are 245 orders, and I wrote the 522 here, but that is not correct. What happened to my screen sharing? Sorry, everybody. We will go back to screen sharing. So there are 245 orders for PAS studies, not 522 studies. And of those, there are 9 humanitarian device exemptions. The way you know it's a humanitarian device exemption, when you go to that database, all the humanitarian device exemptions begin with an H. There are 236 PMA devices in there. The way you know those are PMAs is they begin with a P. And basically the difference between humanitarian device exemptions and PMAs is going to be that they use a different regulatory approval process. The humanitarian device exemptions are products that have less than 8,000 patients per year in the US that get treated for that condition. Whereas the PMAs would be larger and they'd be, there isn't necessarily humanitarian devices that are guaranteed to be lower risk or higher risk. They could be class 1, they could be class 2, they could be class 3. But part of the reason why they're requiring these PAS studies for humanitarian device exemptions is because they were given sort of a conditional approval to release these devices under a humanitarian device exemption because the population is so small, it would be very difficult and burdensome for a company to gather the right kind of clinical data for such a small population. Without making any money off of that. So what they do is they come up with a different regulatory pathway, but in response to that risk of we weren't able to gather very much in the way of clinical data, they have to do these PAS studies after the product's been on the market. For the PMA products, my understanding is that every single PMA that you submit, you have to also submit a post-market surveillance study to the FDA as part of your submission, and they review that protocol, not a finished report, but a protocol, and say, yes, we agree with this PMCF study, or we don't agree with this PMCF study or PAS study, and they're going to have you make edits if they don't agree with it until they do agree with it, and so you have to submit an acceptable study protocol to the FDA that you will execute after the PMA is approved, and it will even indicate when you'll be submitting interim reports and when the final endpoint will be reached. And based on that, they'll decide we want you to continue that PAS study or no, the study is completed and it can be terminated. You will find there are no 510Ks in that database, there are no de novos in that database, and no exempt devices in the database. And there are only just over 1,000 PMAs total. So if you're looking at a percentage of devices that are class 3 that get these PAS studies, it's almost, it's over 20% of the devices are having mandatory PAS studies. Whereas when you go back to this slide, we have more than that percentage. Even if the 12 was for a year instead of for the entire 510K database, we have over 3,000 510Ks per year. So that 12 is a very small percentage. Now on the de novo side, there's been hundreds of those. So that's less of a percentage than 20% or so, but it's still more than the 510Ks. And that would make sense that you'd have these newer devices with new technology. You might have more of these 522 studies being required. And there are 5 PMA devices that have a 522 study being required by the FDA. Now, what if the FDA required PMS? I said at the very beginning, the FDA is talking about going from 21 CFR 820 being the QSR requirements to adopting ISO 1345 by reference, and that will become the de facto quality system requirements for the FDA. Well, will compliance with clause 821 be required? I would say yes, they will require that you comply with clause 821. It's not really that big of a difference from what you're doing now, because there are certain cases when you should be doing post-market surveillance anyway, even though it's not part of the submission requirements to the FDA. You don't have to post it on the FDA databases, and there isn't a 522 or a PAS study for some of these 510K devices, but you do have other things that you would want to be doing post-market surveillance for in general, beyond just doing complaint handling or customer satisfaction. There are legitimate things you should be doing post-market surveillance for, even in the US, according to the FDA guidance documents, and I'll cover that in a minute. But would there be a pre-market submission requirement or just post-market requirements? So pre-market submission means, would the FDA require that you submit a plan for post-market surveillance as part of a 510K or de novo? Right now, that's not permitted. That's not part of the 510K process. They would have to actually get an act of Congress to make that happen. They might be able to change that in the future, but right now that's not an option. Would they probably do that? I don't think they would do it across the board. I think they would do it for 2 specific areas, and they kind of already have. And so that's what we're going to cover in a second. But I don't see that happening, and I will explain why I don't see that happening. There is a very specific reason why I don't think we're going to see pre-market submission requirements. And I don't think we're going to see the same kind of post-market requirements we have in Europe even. So how are you supposed to use post-market surveillance according to the FDA? It's not that you're not supposed to do it. You're supposed to use post-market surveillance as an input into your design process. So when you get feedback about a design, oh, I need to improve this. Oh, it has adverse events. Oh, it has use errors. It has it doesn't last as long. It requires service. Whatever it is, all that feedback that you get that's post-market feedback for a product that's on the market, that's supposed to be an input into your design control process, and you should be deciding what new products or product revisions you should be making based upon that post-market surveillance. So that's a very specific use of that post-market surveillance data. Next, it is supposed to be an input into your human factors process. If you read the 2016 guidance document that the FDA has for for human factors, you wouldn't necessarily get that impression from reading it. They mention in there that you can do FMEAs, but a failure modes and effects analysis is not what they're currently requiring companies to do. They've modified their requirements from an FMEA to being a use-related risk analysis. And the fundamental difference between the use-related risk analysis and the FMEA is looking at different failure modes of the device, and you're going to be looking at user failures or use errors, and it quantifies what the probability of occurrence is for those, and it gives you a risk priority number, and you sort the list based on that, and then implement your protective measures and your risk controls based on the priorities. Well, in a use-related risk analysis, you don't have any probability of occurrence of harm at all, being estimated in the table. Instead, you just focus on severity of harm. And the reason why the FDA prefers this approach is because people are saying, well, this is very unlikely to happen, but until they really have post-market data, they don't know. So the FDA says just base your use-related risk analysis on the severity of the potential harm for that particular use error. And if there's any potential for harm, then we consider that a critical task. So those are the two things that are fundamentally different. They eliminate a column, the use frequency of occurrence of harm, and they add a column for the critical tasks. So that's what you need to include in a URRA. And the FDA has a brand new guidance document they released as a draft in December that actually gives you a template for that. But the FDA has been actually sharing this template for a URRA for about 3 years now in their additional information requests during a 510K review, and saying this is a deficiency in your human factors, even though there wasn't a guidance for it. They want you to also, prior to even doing a URRA, they want you to identify any use errors for similar devices. And I'll walk you through how you do that in a moment. After I've covered this slide, I'll go into the database and I'll show you how you search for those kinds of things. But the identification of use errors for a similar device, so you look in your 3-letter product code on the FDA database and you find what kind of use errors that product has. You should make sure you include those use errors in your URRA, and you should consider risk controls for those use errors, and if possible, design it out of your device. So you should be doing these activities not at the very end, just before you submit, but you should be doing it very early in your design process when you're still working with prototype concepts and some early proof of concept designs, maybe 3D printed models. That's when you want to be looking at the use errors that occur for other devices and try to figure out ways to eliminate those by design, which is what the first priority is for risk controls, always in 14971. Eliminate it by design or method of manufacture first. The third area where it's an input into the human factors process is the identification of use errors for previous generations of your device. Of course, you're going to have the MAUD database that you can look at, and you can identify those things for use errors of similar devices and your own, but you might also have use errors that you've discovered during any kind of simulated use testing, maybe from complaints, maybe other scenarios where you've gathered information on the previous generations of your device, and people have given you feedback like, this is hard to use, it's hard to learn, maybe there's a steep learning curve, whatever it is, they've told you, we'd like this to be improved to prevent some use errors. There's another area where you have post-market surveillance being used in the US, and that's cybersecurity post-market management plan. The FDA wants a PMS plan for cybersecurity to be submitted for your 510Ks if you have any wireless functionality of your device or have any security risks of the software. If you don't have any wireless connectivity, you don't have any removable cards for memory, then you might not have any cybersecurity risks, and you could use that as a rationale. But if you have any cybersecurity risks, the FDA is going to want you to provide a post-market management plan for cybersecurity. Okay, the next slide here. Why collect the post-market surveillance data other than those things that I indicated in the previous slide? What is the benefit to you for collecting post-market surveillance? And there are two areas that come up in addition to the previous slide. One of them is reimbursement. Most companies are not going to do the size of clinical study that you need when you're doing a pre-market study in order to gather all the data that you're going to need for reimbursement. And so it's typical during the first couple of years when a new product enters the market that companies are gathering post-market clinical follow-up data to get reimbursement codes. But you need that historical data in order to get those codes. The second reason is for marketing purposes. Oftentimes they're looking for key opinion leaders to use the product. They want to see people use it in other markets. They want to get it into new hospitals. So maybe a hospital chain, maybe a global purchasing organization. They're using that post-market surveillance data as marketing, either in a white paper or a formal peer-reviewed journal article. But many physicians and hospitals will say, where's the clinical data that shows this is better than what we're already using? Because we're not just going to use something because it's cheaper or new. We also want to make sure that it's effective and safe. So they're asking for that data in that evidence-based medicine is becoming the norm. So does the FDA ask for any post-market surveillance data? I mean, we did talk about use errors in usability, and we did talk about cybersecurity, but does the FDA during an inspection ever ask for post-market surveillance data? The answer is no. I have never heard an FDA inspector asking for post-market surveillance data other than complaints and MDRs. That's all they ask for. That's the first things they go to: CAPA, complaints, MDRs, and that's where most of your 483s are issued. We don't have inspectors looking at post-market surveillance procedures and saying you're not following 821 in the standard, and they're not writing up 483s for your PMCF studies and saying you should be doing things differently. But why? There's two reasons. Number one, they're not enforcing it right now. First of all, it's not technically a requirement in the quality system regulations yet. So that's something they're going to have to train the people on, but they're not enforcing it now. And the history of the FDA is, even after it becomes part of the requirements, they don't usually enforce it right away. They have some time for industry to adopt it and write procedures and train, and then they start enforcing it. But the other reason is they just don't have the training for the inspectors. A lot of people don't realize that there are two completely different branches of the device division. You're working with either ORA usually or ODE. The Office of Device Evaluations is who you submit a 510K or a PMA or a de novo to. And they make the decision on whether a new product should be allowed to be marketed in the US or approved if it's a PMA. ORA is the regulatory affairs group, and they do enforcement. So they go out and do the inspections. They're the ones that enforce recalls. They decide whether the recall is complete or not. They go out and shut companies down if they have to. They're the ones that take companies to court. They're the ones that make sure you're not saying things on your website that you're not allowed to say. So the Office of Regulatory Affairs is a very different set of skills that they're teaching you. They're teaching you how to gather data in case you have to take them to court. So they're taught to be very polite and tell you everything's okay and you have nothing to worry about, when in fact they're here just gathering data in case they need to take you to court later. And they usually posture a little bit and position things in a way that make people very nervous, and they're confrontational sometimes. They think companies are hiding things from them, and sometimes the companies are legitimately hiding things, and sometimes they're not. But the ORA inspectors, it might be a food inspector. It might be somebody that started out in the food industry, and then they were trained how to do medical device inspections. They're not somebody that's a biomedical engineer that has extensive experience on how to design and validate devices. That's what ODE hires. They hire people with master's degrees in biomedical engineering all the time. ORA does not. It doesn't mean they don't have any, just that's not their primary inspectors. So very different training, very different enforcement environment. So that's why the FDA is not asking for it, and that's why I've never seen any 483s related to post-market surveillance activities. Okay, we're going to have a little shift here where I'm going to show you some other things on the internet rather than showing you slides, and it would be a little bit more interactive. So you're welcome to ask me to do searches differently or ask me questions. But before I do that, I wanted to say every Friday, we do a live streaming on YouTube. So if this has been valuable to you so far, every Friday I do a 30-minute session, maybe 20, 25-minute session on a live topic. And this Friday's is tomorrow at 12:30 Eastern time. It's going to be on method of sterilization. So if you have any topics you want me to do this on, just let us know. But tomorrow's is on how to select and help validate best sterilization method. So I thought that might be helpful to some of you out there, and please share it. And this video will also be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go watch it again or share it with other people, all you got to do is share it. And if you want to be notified when we're doing live streaming, just make sure you ring the bell when you subscribe. So I already showed you where the FDA databases are. That's when I went to fda.gov, the medical devices, and then I looked for all the medical device databases. And I showed you how to search there. But now we're going to go to a different place. We're going to go to software that we've licensed. It's called Basil Systems, and I'm going to show you how we do the same kind of searches there. So this is how I search there in the FDA database. But when you're interested in Basil Systems, this is our licensed version of it. This is the company's website. So if you want a demo or request a trial, this is how you get it. It's basilsystems.com. But I'm going to take you right into the software. There's actually two modules that we have licensed. So one of those is regulatory affairs. And I just realized I'm probably not sharing the right screen. Now I think you can see my sharing of Basil Systems. So this was the company website, basilsystems.com. If you want to get a request a trial or see the product. And thank you for confirming you can see now. And this is the licensed version that we use. On the Basil Systems software, we have two different modules. One's a regulatory module and one's a post-market module. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the regulatory before we jump into the post-market. And that'll help you understand how I get the information that I use in post-market. When I'm doing a search in the regulatory database, let's say I'm working with a client that is developing a glucose sensor. And I have no idea what the three-letter product code is for a glucose sensor. That is not the case because we have lots of clients that are working on similar products. But if I look on glucose and let's try sensor. Okay, so we have the brand new Dexcom G7 here. The product code is QBJ. And if I click on that code, and you may have noticed already, this is really fast. This is real time, lag and everything of a live video webinar. You saw me just click on that and immediately get the information. That's one of the reasons why we're using this software, because it's so much fast. And when you're working on projects by the hour, it saves the client money and it saves us time so we can work on more projects. But this description here is an integrated continuous glucose monitoring system, factory calibrated. Now, the one that we had here was the Dexcom G7. So I wrote down QBJ on my notes here. That's one of the codes. But I know there are other codes out there. Oh, here's one, the Freestyle Libre. That's the competitor of theirs, but it's a different code. Huh. I wonder what the other code is. Oh, same thing at the beginning, integrated continuous glucose monitoring system, factory calibrated, but not for use with automated insulin delivery systems. So that's, now I know I need to go to this client and say, are we having this glucose monitoring system talk with an insulin pump or not? Because if it's talking with an insulin pump, then I need the QBJ classification, also a 510K, but very different requirements. But if it's not talking with a glucose with an insulin pump, then I need the QLG product code. And you could, over time, change the software and change your device. So you might start out with QLG and then eventually upgrade the classification to the QBJ once you've gotten the proper clinical data support that this can be used for controlling a glucose insulin pump, or sorry, a continuous implantable insulin pump. But yeah, you're not going to probably do that right out of the gate unless you have a very large budget. So that's the difference between those two product codes. But you know, I know there are other product codes out there for glucose monitors other than these two. I wonder what those are. Well, here's the code down here, NBW, over-the-counter blood glucose test system. So these are the little disposable, I won't say disposable, but they might as well be. You get them at Walmart and they're not very expensive. They almost give away the reader with the strips. The strips are what cost you all your money. But there's these little tiny meters that are handheld, and you put a little drop of blood on the strip and insert the strip into the reader, and it gives you a reading in a couple of seconds of what your blood glucose level is. Whereas the wearable sensors are the other two codes. So very different technology, completely different code here, in different requirements for the testing of these. So there are three different potential product codes here that I could be looking at. And so now I'm working with this client, like, which of these three types of blood glucose systems are you developing? Developing one that's over the counter, handheld, not wearable, a wearable one, or a wearable one that's going to talk to an insulin pump. Which of the three are you trying to develop? Now I know there's three product categories. This is the classic use of this regulatory database, and it was all really, really fast. And everything I type up here is searching the entire database, and it's doing a natural language algorithm search, not a Boolean search. So if I misspell something or get not quite the right word, it'll pull up related things to give me a much better search. And there's other things I can do here too. So I can also go down here to product code, and I could go down this list and select things. But there are other ways I can search through this product code list. I can select different ones, but I can click on that little filter button here. I can select all by clicking on this. I can also search them, so it'll rank them by alphabet. For right now, it's going from the end of the alphabet to the beginning. I can click on again, and it'll go the beginning to the end. And I can actually, it did it by numbers. I had it reversed. So the A to Z is the alphabet, and this one is the number on the right here. So this is the number of records, highest to lowest, switch it, lowest to highest, and this is the alphabet, B to Q, or Q down to B. And I can also type in something here. So I could put in continuous, and it's going to start narrowing things on the list by they include the word continuous. So these are the only ones that actually include this much of the word. So it really becomes a very efficient way of narrowing my list down. This is extremely helpful when you're doing searches, saves you a ton of time, and we don't have this when we go to the FDA database. It's all Boolean searches. It's slow. You saw it earlier. I was trying to just load up a database, not even do a search, and it was slow. And sometimes you get not available now. You don't get that on this service. So now that we have our three product codes, now I'm going to show you how we use it in the Postmarket database. So we just click on up on this icon up here for Basil Systems. We click on the second link, Postmarket. And in here, this gives me a dashboard screen. But I'm going to say, I'm not interested in the whole dashboard here. It gives me a lot of interesting facts if I want trivia about medical devices. But I really want to do a new database search here, and I'm going to look for the specific product codes. So let's look for QBJ. So I have one company under that code. I bet I know who that is. So I click on this, and where's the start analytics? Sorry, I'm looking at this the way I don't normally do that. It's not even listing the manufacturer. Oh, because I get this short period here. Let me take a different approach here. Sorry, I should have tested this first before I dug in. So when I'm going to search, we'll start over. We will search for QBJ. And we will go to the category result here. and it says I have 805,000 adverse events. That's what it says here. So I want to actually look at these analytics, and it gives me the analytics for this. And it gives me a lot of them. All these blue ones are malfunctions and injuries. It has a very small number of injuries here. If I hover over any one of these columns, it'll tell me how many yellow and red are in there. So 0 death, 93 injury, 0 death, 93 injury. So each month we have very small numbers of injuries and no deaths, except out here we had 2. So you see very few deaths, mostly malfunctions of this QBJ product. And when you look down here, they're all Dexcom. They're older versions, the G6. I don't see any G7s yet, probably because the G7 wasn't even released then. We look at the most recent month. You still see G6s. So no adverse event. Oh, I did see a G7 right there. So we're starting to see the G7s come through just now. So that gives me a little bit of information about that. Now, another thing that I can look on here, I can look for another product. I could look for the QLG product code as well. Sorry. I should look here again, QLG, search, product code, click here, and look at the data. Okay, so this one, little different profile. We have more yellow as a percentage under this product code. So more injuries is what we're seeing as a percentage. And as an aggregate number, we're also seeing more there. So we were seeing around 100 in the other. Here we're seeing hundreds. In this case, out here, we're seeing like almost 1,000 injuries. But once again, almost no deaths. So good news is most of these deaths are not associated with any of these complaints or adverse events that are occurring. So that means generally you might get an injury, but you're not going to die from using this device. That's good. And you see the different brands that they have here, and they indicate the type of incident, whether it's an injury or it's a malfunction. And if it was red, then it would be the death category. And I can also export this data. I just click on this button here. I can export the adverse events, the recalls, or the devices, any one of the bunch, and I can give it a name, and it will be very fast. So I'll just do test here, and boom, it creates the data set for me, and it's being saved, and I will have it down here below in a moment. I can also save these databases. So when I do searches, let's say over here, there are a whole bunch of product codes here. I don't care about these other ones here. I only care about this one. So I'm going to narrow it down to just this. And now I'm going to save this database. So that is an option that I have here. I can export it here. I can also save data set. And I could say this is QLG only. And I can save that. I could also even narrow it down. I could say I only want Abbott. So I could go up here again, and I could say new data. Oh, that is not what I meant to do. I could go up here to edit data set. The pro code, I've got that. The owner operator, this. And I guess I have to start a new one because I already saved it once. I was hoping that I might be able to save this twice, but I can't. So I'd have to start a new search and do that. But the more efficient way to do this would have been to save it after I narrowed it down to the owner operator. You can also narrow it down to a specific establishment. If more than one site has issues, they would be listed here, but Abbott only has one site that's an issue. They also have different brands of the Abbott. So maybe I'm only interested in Freestyle Libre. Maybe I'm only interested in the Freestyle. I could say, I'm only interested in this one. All the Freestyle ones, they have all these injuries. If I look at the Freestyle Libre, they disappeared. I wonder what the issue is. So this is something you can learn by analyzing the post-market surveillance data of a competitor product when you're designing your own, to figure out what is causing all these injuries for the Freestyle that is not happening in the Libre, and I want to avoid those. So that's a powerful information that you want to be gathering. That's why you do these searches. We also have a couple other tools here. There's this tool here. It's a data table creator. It allows me to compare two different products that might not even be in the same product code. So we already wrote down the Dexcom G6. So we'll put down G6 here. And it's going to give me all the data for G6, just like that, super fast. Now we're going to put in the Libra, which is the safer of the two, the one that didn't have the injuries. We're going to put that one in here. And look at that. Now it's telling me adverse events. We have 4 times as many approximately adverse events for the G6 as we do the Libra. Now that doesn't mean it's more dangerous. It could just be they sell 4 times as much. But you can do a comparison and you can see, what kind of problems are we having? Oh, half of the problems with the G6 are wireless communication. And why might that be important? Remember, this is going to communicate with an insulin pump. So if it's not communicating, then I have to manually adjust my pump. And if I'm asleep at the time, that's an issue. Or if I'm driving or whatever. So I could suddenly have a dangerous situation occur. That's why there are adverse event reports. It's malfunction, no injury occurred. But if it happened again, it could cause an injury. So therefore, that's why they classify it that way. It's a malfunction of the device, not an injury. So when you are looking at these databases, these can tell you weaknesses of competitor products. So if you're doing a strength, like a SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, a weakness of the Abbott system clearly is that they have all this wireless communication issue with their G6. Be very interesting to see if the G7 has similar problems. So in maybe another year, we'll be able to do that comparison for the same time range and see what we see. For other things like incorrect, adequate, imprecision, we have a real problem with the Libre. That's most of the issue, almost never an issue for the G6. No output is what it gives you here. So instead of giving you an imprecise value, it just gives you no value at all. So maybe by changing the way you have your software settings, you get a different answer. Instead of an imprecise reading, they just give you no reading at all. Is that better? Is that worse? I'm not sure. But this is the kind of data you can get. Now, one of the things you might not have noticed is up here, it says United States. I can just click on this and I can get Canada. So I get all the Canadian data. Very similar profile, but there are some differences. I can also get Australia. So definitely going to be smaller numbers because they're smaller markets. But if you're doing post-market surveillance for the purposes of identifying use errors, cybersecurity issues, or opportunities to improve the design, or just don't make the mistake of your competitor, this is definitely a valuable tool. Now, skip ahead a couple of years in the future, we'll have UDAMED online and we'll be downloading the data from UDAMED, and we'll be able to look at the European data as well. And now we'll be able to do automated searches for the post-market surveillance that we were talking about this morning's section, all from this database. And we'll be able to compare different markets and compare different products head to head. So the G6 versus the Libre, I can look at those from a post-market surveillance database in any market, and I can see what kind of problems we have. And that can really help me identify what we need to worry about, make sure our risk analysis is thorough enough, make sure our risk controls are effective. And we can even look at different time points, like I've been showing February to this up here, but I can always change it. So if I wanted to change it to 2022 instead of 2021, just reload, and we have new data. And if I want to go back here, so before this was 400,000, So we're seeing approximately 200,000 per year. And so you could see when a spike occurs or when something disappears. And you can also see in the graph of the data over time. But this is another way to slice and dice the data by country, by product code, by brand, and by year. Those are all possibilities. And you can save as, load. You can load data in here, and you can export it as a CSV file. So if I want to do that, boom, now it's down here. So my test that I did before, when I exported, that's here. And the Libra one that I just did is here. And all that data and all the data fields are here. So awesome data. And if you go all the way over to the right here, they have the actual descriptions of the events. Trying to find one for you to see here. It's not conducive to really show you. Here we go. Here's the beginning of the file. So I will just click on this one and we will wrap the text. That's a little better. Make it. So these are the patient problems. Then we have manufacturer narratives as well. I can make that really big and we can wrap the text on that. And now it makes it easier to read these narratives from the manufacturer and see what the problem really was. So you don't even have to open up the records. You can just export it and go through this. You can also do a Control F search now in this Excel spreadsheet and find specific words that you're looking for that might be a type of issue that you're looking for. You can look through your own records, competitors' issues, and find that information. Oh, it says somebody can't see the spreadsheet. I wish I had looked earlier. My apologies. Here we go, folks. So this is the spreadsheet that I was trying to show you. And what I was showing you is this manufacturer narrative column. All I did is I changed the settings to wrap text so I could actually read that column. And without even opening up the records, I exported all the records. And now I can go to any one of these records I want, and I can see what the narrative was, all as an export. And I don't know if you've ever tried that on the FDA database, but our entire webinar would be twice as long if I were doing all this on the FDA database. So much more efficient to export it here. And I've checked to make sure the data numbers come out the same. Early on, when we were looking at different software tools, Basil Systems one, there were some other systems we looked at. We found some discrepancies between the number of adverse events we saw in the FDA database and the number that we saw in the software. We've recently done a database head-to-head check, FDA versus Basil, and we found the numbers within a couple of units. So depending on whether you did it at, whether they did the data dump from the FDA's database at 8 o'clock in the morning or middle of the night versus when we do the database dump from the FDA, you get different numbers, but they're only differ by 1 or 2 points, not differing by 10% or 20%, which is what we were seeing in some other software tools. So very good agreement with what the FDA has. Looking at the other tools, I gotta stop sharing and sharing again. We had this G6 Libre. So I've opened that, and that should be showing up in a moment. So this gives you a comparison table, just like as I was seeing on the screen, but now it gives it to me in an Excel spreadsheet so I can do something with it. And it gives me all the device problems. So some people are manually typing those in, some people copy and paste them, but the better way to do it is just export the list, and you have all these, and you can create pivot tables and things or pie charts. But this is extremely helpful, and you have patient problems down here, and then you have device problems at the beginning. They duplicate each other. So you may have more than one device problem for one patient problem or vice versa. So don't think that, there's all of these plus the other. They're the same records. Just they're indicating how many are device problems and how many are patient problems separately. But they have these two brands side by side, and then the total of the two. So I will get back to our slide deck now that I've shown you a lot of stuff in the Basil Systems. Those are the links, the FDA databases and the Basil Systems, if you need to go get them. If you're interested in other stuff on the comparison from the FDA's approach and the EU approach, I actually did a podcast with Munir, Easy Medical Devices, or Medical Devices Made Easy podcast. And we had a great time on that. He really does a fantastic job of interviewing. We covered this, and it's actually on our YouTube. It's on his YouTube channel. So if you look for Easy Medical Device Podcast with Munir, you'll actually see that's one of his recent videos that he's posted. So you'll find more of a discussion between Munir and I, rather than me showing you these heavy slides where we're going through the demonstrations. That was just a narrative with the two of us. He asked some great questions, and I think you'll find it entertaining. He's a great personality. I hope that was helpful to you today. If you have any other questions, you can ask them now, put it in the chat. And if we don't have any questions, if you want to put a comment in below the video, I'm going to post this on YouTube, and you'll be able to comment there, and I'll respond to your comments there as well, because we check that on a regular basis. I hope that was helpful to everybody, and thank you very much for your time. Okay, we have a chat question here. Oh, thank you. You are very welcome. And I apologize for the screen sharing. I didn't anticipate when I went to Excel that I would have to change the sharing. You're very welcome. Thank you for all the thanks. And I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to call it a day. And thank you very much, everybody. And leave comments below in the video description. And share it if you think it'll be helpful to somebody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.